Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. By the way, happy Constitution Day. Did you realize today is Constitution Day? I've got a few details on what the Constitution is and what it isn't, as well as why, even 200 some years later, it still requires people who are paying attention to what is going on. Details are coming up.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. You know, it's hard to believe that we're still celebrating the miracle that was pulled off in 1787 in Philadelphia by a group of delegates from then the 13 republics. Each state was considered an individual republic at that time to basically work the kinks out of their Articles of Confederation. Now, what happened was when they met, they threw out the articles and actually started a project, which ultimately became the Constitution of the United States. And so in interest of, I'm going to give you the thumbnail sketch here of what the Constitution is versus what it isn't. I've heard people ask sometimes, what is the most important right given to us by the Constitution? And you probably understand that's a trick question. The Constitution gives us no rights whatsoever. What it represents is a compact, which means a contract between multiple parties, in this case, the 13 independent states, that called into existence a federal government, which would look over areas that they clearly specified in the Constitution. So it called the federal government into existence. It defined its purposes, its shape, the different branches, the checks and balances, as well as the upper limits of the power of each of those branches. It's funny, we don't hear a lot of politicians talk about it in those terms today, but that is what we're celebrating. And when you consider that for nearly 200 and almost 40 years, it has stood, well, some countries have changed their form of government like people change their socks. It just seems to come and go very quickly. I'm looking in your direction. So one of the cruelest tricks, though, that the founding generation played on us was when they gave us that Constitution and the protections of our God-given rights that are baked into that compact, they counted on us being an informed populace, meaning that we would be aware of what was going on. We would study things out. There was also kind of an implicit trust that our press would accurately report things to us. That's not something that we see much these days. And so there are some very serious challenges ahead of us, but it is still a day very much worth celebrating. I want to share with you some thoughts from Rachel Hazlett from the Idaho Freedom Foundation, honoring the Constitution on this Constitution Day. And she puts this so beautifully. Rachel says, today we honor the signing of the foundational charter of our republic, the U.S. Constitution. Signed on September 17, 1787, the Constitution remains a beacon of liberty and justice, outlining the principles and rule of law by which we govern. Now, the framers of the Constitution were ordinary men who accomplished an extraordinary task. They were soldiers, lawyers, surgeons, businessmen, and farmers, husbands and fathers from all walks of life. Some came from wealth, others from humble beginnings. Some had little formal education, while others attended prestigious universities. They differed in age and in political philosophy, yet they were united by a common value, which was an unshakable belief in liberty and self-governance. Now, Rachel goes on to tell us the Constitution guarantees the protection of our God-given rights. It establishes the structure of our government, divides power between the federal and state governments, limits governmental overreach, that's an important one, and creates a system of checks and balances to prevent tyranny. Its signing marked the culmination of months of debate, revision, and resolve, resulting in a charter of freedom that had laid the foundation for the freest, most popular, most prosperous, and most benevolent nation the world has ever known. Its power and perfection are manifested by the fact that now over 160 countries have their own constitutions modeled, in part at least, after the U.S. exemplary charter. Through war and peace, through division and unity, failure and triumph, the Constitution has endured, and it remains the embodiment of the promise of liberty. Now, this is not just, empty accolades for a document. This is celebrating a real, true accomplishment throughout the history of humanity. Not very many people have been able to enjoy the degree of freedom that we have enjoyed. And even among those people who have found freedom historically, it's not the kind of thing that sticks around if the people do not remain worthy of it. And I don't mean in the sense that you need to go confess to your priest so you can be considered worthy. I mean, you have to exert a certain amount of self-control in order to be a self-governing people. And the Constitution, as I believe it was John Adams put it, was made for a religious and moral people, and it's not adequate to the governing of any other type. Think of the direction that we have been pushed, not so much that we've chosen to move, but we've been pushed over the last few decades and the last few generations. Does it seem pretty clear that some people really want to push the religious and moral part to the side because power is really the most important thing to them? So with that in mind, and with the understanding that we need to understand what our politicians are doing, I want to share with you some excerpts from another essay from Rachel Hazlett from the Idaho Freedom Foundation, The Political Bait and Switch, something we're all too familiar with here in Idaho. This is when promises become propaganda. I love the example that she begins with here. She says, imagine there's a business you're looking to invest in. The businessman pitches you a compelling plan, explains how your money will be used, and promises long-term returns. So you cut them a check, leave them to their work, excited for the future. And then a month later, you check in, only to find the original plan you were sold has been abandoned. The funds were spent on unrelated side projects, and there is no clear accountability for the outcome. Now, in the private sector, this would be called fraud, or at least serious mismanagement. But in politics, this is par for the course. Candidates like to talk tough, Rachel tells us, about hot button issues like spending, taxes, and immigration. However, they often find themselves falling on the wrong side of a vote during the legislative session about the very issues they made bold promises about. And year after year, elected officials promise Idahoans they will slash spending and reduce government agency bloat. Voters are continually told they'll see real action, particularly through initiatives like the multi-year Medicaid review panel. But during the session, what do lawmakers typically do? They overspend and grow government. Now, she says not only has the budget grown by approximately 55% between 2020 and 2025, but it's also tied up in socialist-style programs like Launch, a multi-million-dollar workforce development program, sorry, that needs some air quotes, that funnels taxpayer money into educational subsidies with minimal oversight. Now, that's a far cry from the kneecapping of bureaucracies. Instead, the Idaho legislature has actually helped to expand them. And during the election season, Idahoans were sold a vision of a type of golden age, a time when elected officials would keep taxpayers' hard-earned money in their pockets. Sounds nice, right? Well, after all the speeches and slick mailers, what actually changed? The answer is not nearly as much as we were promised. Rachel tells us the grocery tax repeal, for example, consistently supported by the vast majority of Idahoans, was once again left to die without serious consideration. And additionally, there was no deliverance on significant property tax reform. Instead, Idahoans were afforded breadcrumbs for bookkeeping with a grocery tax credit and a minimal property tax reduction. But Idahoans continue to shoulder the weight of overtaxation in an inflated economy. Instead of representing their constituents, she says too many elected officials play a different game, one where the goal is not liberty, but rather the preservation of their own power. Now, if a private citizen lied to secure your hard-earned money and then spent it on personal perks, justice would be demanded. But in politics, we're told this phenomenon is part of the broader strategy and to wait until the next election to remove them. Well, Rachel concludes, getting conservative legislation across the finish line should not be a heavy lift in a state like Idaho. The fact that it isn't simply a failure, it's a betrayal of trust. When politicians lie to secure your vote and then govern in direct contradiction to their promises, it isn't strategy. That's fraud. And if we continue to accept them without consequence, we are complicit in our own exploitation. Rachel says politicians must be held accountable for the gap between what they say and what they do. If elected officials can lie, fail, and coast through re-election with no consequences, then we're living in a rigged game, and the only way to win is to stop playing by their rules. Something she points out in that essay, too, is that your currency, your political currency, is in your vote. And do you feel like you've wasted that vote sometimes? I mean, I'm not naming particular names, but have you elected people based on promises they made to make government more accountable, to streamline it, to cut the costs, only to find out that it was just business as usual once they got up to the legislative session, at the beginning of each year? See, a lot of people have caught on to this, but still don't really know what to do. So I'm not going to solve this problem for you in the next 60 seconds, but I am going to suggest this is one of the reasons why. First and foremost, it's important that you be willing to do your own homework. Look, the lying liars who tell lies for the fake news media and legacy media, they're kind of wedded to that power too. They see it as a source of their own legitimacy, which coincidentally is fading even as we speak. But they're not going to tell you the truth about the true costs, not just in terms of dollars, but in terms of your freedoms when government acts beyond its proper scope. So you need to be the kind of person who can be informed and think things through and suss out the truth for yourself. Secondly, you need to hold those politicians accountable. That means you have got to be active and tracking not just the politicians. It's not just their personality. Look at what their actual votes tell you. Now, the Idaho Freedom Foundation's Freedom Index is a wonderful way to do this. Many different matrices of whether it expands government or shrinks government, whether it increases the costs or lessens the costs, whether it undermines the family or upholds the family. These are things that have to be considered. So you have people on your side, you have allies who will help you to make a good decision, but ultimately that responsibility, if we want to be self-governing, if we want to honor what was given us in 1787 in the US Constitution, we have to be willing to do our part. Yes, there is a bit of heavy lifting, but on the bright side, you'll never be dependent on someone else to tell you how things really are or what it all means. You'll be able to figure that out for yourself. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Hyde.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.